Well, believe it or not, it's been 5 years now since the Benoit tragedies. In fact, I was talking with a friend the other day, and in a lot of aspects, it feels like it was a lot longer than that, actually. And joining me right now is Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer. Does it feel like it's been 5 years since that happened to you, Dave?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, you know what's funny is that 5 years isn't that long, but it feels like it was a lifetime ago.
Yeah,
and usually they say that when you get older, things like go quicker in 5 years, like a snap of a finger. So much has changed, I think, between all the different sports that you and I cover. 5 years is a long time.
Yeah.
How much everything changes.
That's the way it felt like to me, because a lot of times you feel like, wow, that just happened. And with this, it actually feels like it did happen almost a lifetime ago. And, you know, you look at everything that's happened since in the aftermath. Let's go back to when it actually happened, because when did you first started hearing something had happened to Chris Benoit and or his family that weekend?
You know, he missed the pay-per-view, so that's on a Sunday.
Right.
But I can't say I really heard anything. You know, I mean, I think that there was like the story that his wife was sick. I think I heard that, like that night. You know, which was the food poisoning thing that he had called the office about, I think, is where that story came from. And then I really didn't hear anything until, you know, right after the wrestlers got the word from management that they had died, and then a couple of people who were friends with one of the wrestlers called me. You know, I don't know, it was like actually like an hour later or so, and just I got two calls right in a row, and one was pretty detailed, and the other was not so detailed about what had happened, and you know, at that point there was no. You know, nothing was out other than that they died, and all these rumors were started to fly about, you know, like carbon monoxide poisoning and all these crazy stories that weren't true. But, you know, I did get like one call from someone who pretty much said the whole thing, you know, that they thought that Chris had done it, and that, you know, that WWE knew about it. And this is still 2 hours before Raw went on the air. So, I mean, it wasn't like, I mean, that's why that whole story, when it keeps going about how, you know, when they did that tribute show, they didn't know. I mean, it's like I know, and I know where the source came from, and it was you know, it was indirectly WWE. But when I've talked with the wrestlers, none of them knew. I mean, it was something that was kept pretty quiet.
Yeah, and that was one of the things I was going to bring up to you, because it was weird watching, you know, that show that night, because they decided to do the tribute show, and they had, you know, they were showing various matches of his career, and they were having other people talk about their memories of Chris, and you know, just about midway through that show or a little bit more, you could sense a different tone in some of the people that were talking. Like at that point, word had started to leak out that, you know, Chris had done it, and it changed the entire tone of the show. But, and I still think there's a lot of question marks on when did WWE know, and why did they do a show the way that they did?
Well, you know, I mean, what prepares you for this in crisis management? You know what I'm saying? It's like, you know, I mean, it's one thing. I mean, they had experience with deaths of wrestlers. I mean, because unfortunately they happen far too frequently, and they knew what they do when a wrestler dies. We do a tribute show, and so that's what they did. Unfortunately, this was not the situation to do a tribute show. But you know, as far as like they you know, they knew. I mean, Chris's father was told. You know, and it was indirectly again also from WWE. The police knew, and this was all before. It was a 3-hour Raw that night, so it's an 8 a.m. This is all like around 6, 7 o'clock before the show started. And why they kept the tribute show going? I mean, at that moment, I don't know that anyone's thinking straight. I don't know that like they're thinking like this is what we do. I mean, this is and the word's not out, or are we going for ratings? I mean, there's people who were skeptical even within that company who've told me all those shows are about ratings. You know, I mean, I don't know where they were coming from, why they did it. But, you know, I mean, they obviously felt horrible that they did it when all was said and done, and they probably got a lot of bad publicity out of it because they're doing a tribute show, and by the time that show's over, you know, I mean, this was a major national news story. It was actually one of the biggest news stories of the entire year. And, you know, they're not used to that either.
What were your thoughts, though, looking back at it now, about the coverage that the national media gave that case?
Well, I mean, it started out pretty bad. I mean, there's a lot of sensationalism to it. And then a lot of people lost interest, and then a couple of places kept interest daily and kind of pounded it. And to me, it felt like for about a month there was incredible interest, and then people had their fill of it, and it kind of went away. And they hammered WWE really, really hard, and WWE had a lot of things that they had to answer for, but everyone kind of moved on. And WWE did change, though, if you look back at things. I mean, there's if you really look back, this one actually made the most changes of any death that there was, as far as just a lot of different policies that were for the positive. And they had to, because they got a lot of negative publicity. But I mean, as far as how they handled it publicly, I mean, they were so freaking paranoid of the steroid thing. I mean, they just came out right away, with Chris couldn't have been on steroids. It couldn't be steroids. And this is the day after. And it's nobody knows what it could have been. And to this day, nobody knows what it could have been. I mean, the prevailing theory is that all the concussions caused problems. And then in the last 5 years, Chris was the gateway to this whole NFL concussion story, because it was the most tragic, and the first of a number of tragedies, and in most cases that involved football players as opposed to pro wrestlers. But so it was like this giant national story, and it's just the whole ramifications of it. Immediate and long term were very big in wrestling, and even to the extent of everyone worries about concussions in wrestling. And up until that weekend, what the deal with concussions in wrestling were. You get a concussion, you go on to the next town. You don't take time off. You just, and that's how it was.
Yeah, when we talk about it, I mean, it was like a year earlier where they had actually instituted the wellness policy. But I mean, this incident really forced them to upgrade it a lot. Talk about some of the positives that I think that WWE has done and they've learned from this whole situation.
Well, the concussion thing is the one that comes to mind right away. Mm-hmm. I mean, people might be skeptical, and again, concussion science is all relatively, I think, new, and there's a lot left to learn. But I think WWE does what it should do. I mean, we just saw at the last pay-per-view, Alberto Del Rio had a concussion, and if this was 2006, I mean, he's working that show. There's not even a question. He's working the TVs the next night. But, he took time off until he could pass his testing to get cleared. And, they've had that before where they've had to pull people from shows and big stars. And so that's the main one. I think that they've, monitored heart testing a lot more. The drug policy is probably, is strengthened. I mean, one of the issues with the drug policy is that, Chris had damaged his endocrine system, by taking steroids probably for, roughly 20 years, throughout his entire pro wrestling career. So he needed testosterone replacement, which is actually a hot button issue in a lot of sports right now, just to maintain, his normal life. The problem was that he was, testosterone replacement is supposed to get you to normal levels, and he was at 5 times normal levels. And, so he was essentially juicing, but he was able to get through the policy because he had that testosterone replacement. And WWE was, that's a really embarrassing thing for a company with a drug policy. And then, the guy turns out, a 59.6 to 1 ratio when it's supposed to be 1 to 1 testosterone to epitestosterone. So they had to close certain loopholes. I mean, now if you have damage to your system, they're not going to hire you because of the ability to abuse that drug. Within, legally, but you're abusing it still.
It's always there's always people that have question marks about the wellness policy that WWE has. Do you think it affects guys more that are trying to get into the company or guys that are actually in the company?
I think the guys in the company, getting into the company, you just have to pass a test to get in there. And I mean, there's still that feeling that they like bodies. And I mean, we've seen guys who are hired that are, big, clumsy guys with great bodies who get the job there, and then they've got to figure out once they have to pass the test to get in. But you can cycle on and off and pass tests, and it's not that difficult.
Right.
But when you're in WWE, you're tested at random. They don't know the day of the test. You can be tested at any time. And I'm not saying everyone's clean because that's pretty naive, and there are drugs that you're not going to be able to catch. But I don't know that they play favorites because, I mean, we saw Jeff Hardy when he was, the second or third most popular guy, or arguably the first most popular guy in the company, suspended at one point, missing a WrestleMania. We saw, Rey Mysterio just suspended twice, who's a kid's hero. Mystico or Sin Cara, who's a kid's hero. Were people who, in theory, if you're going to favor people and keep their names out of the press, so to speak, for failing tests, the kids' heroes are the guys who are going to do it, and that was Jeff, and that was, whatever. And then Randy Orton right now is also on suspension, who was, third most popular wrestler in the company at the time, at a very significant point in time with a lot of injuries and things like that. So, I mean, there's always allegations that there's a double standard. There probably is, but, where that ceiling is on who they're going to suspend, the ceiling is pretty darn high if Randy Orton and Rey Mysterio are being suspended.
Right. And I know that we, as a general public and every sport out there, still have a lot to learn when it comes to head injuries and concussions and things of that nature. But at that same time, for a long time, obviously in wrestling, people have used chairs, and used headshots. Are you surprised it's taken this as long as it did? And WWE has more or less banned it now, and TNA for the most part has, but you still see it there. But are you surprised it took as long for people to come around when it comes to chair shots to the head?
The thing is you had a big fight at the time. Like, to me on the outside, when Vince first said, which would have been, I think he was on CNN pretty quickly after the Benoit thing, we're banning chair shots to the head, and then they kind of forgot about it, and they got some bad publicity over a couple of them, and then they actually did officially ban it, and, Undertaker and Triple H, I think, did it in one match, but that's the only time I think that they did. And like with TNA, it's sort of banned, but what you have is this, people grow up with a certain style of wrestling, and wrestlers grow up with a certain style of wrestling, and they don't want to change. And there were a lot of wrestlers who, came from the chair shots to the head era who were vehement. I can do this safe. This is wrestling. You can't ban it. And a lot of fans are the same way. It's like you don't want things changed in what you like. But I think that in time, for the most part, everyone's kind of come to the conclusion. But even like with Ring of Honor, the guys got carried away, used it as angles and stuff like that. I don't know that you should. And maybe, the chair shots to the head is kind of like this lightning rod thing. But I don't know that, they say, well, it can be done safe. And I'm sure if you tap someone light with it, it can be done safe. But, then people don't like the chair shot because it's not hard enough. So I think that it's best for all concerned you do it to the upper back, which is what WWE does and TNA does. It's still a chair shot. You can still sell it. And, if you bruise your upper back, it's one thing, but bruising your brain is something completely different. And
on that same note, when it comes to talking about head injuries, do you think wrestlers have gotten a lot smarter and a lot safer when it comes to things that they would do? Do you think they would do that on their own, or do you think it only comes from the fact that they're being policed by people above them?
I think it comes that they're being policed by people above them. I think wrestlers will do, not every wrestler. I think that there are plenty of wrestlers, more than ever before, who would just say, no, I'm not going to take it, unless, there was a locker room mentality that, if you don't, there's something wrong with you. But, there were guys even before, like Lance Storm, just an example because I know him, he wasn't, when he was in ECW, he wouldn't take chair shots to the head, or, and when he was called to deliver him. If you remember the Lance Storm chair shots to the head, he would hold back because for fear of injuring the other guy, and people, it was considered terrible, his chair shots. But so there were already guys like that. But I think that the number would be higher right now. At the same time, there are guys, and I don't want to single out ex ECW guys, but they came from that chair shot to the head mentality. A lot of them, fought this thing tooth and nail, and probably some of them are still fighting it now. And if they could get away with it on their own and have that as part of their matches, absolutely they would do it. Because
we've seen wrestling moves, especially over the last 15, 20 years, go up so much when it comes to how dangerous they can be and high impact. We've seen this in football when it comes to injuries of guys, especially after their career. We've seen the ripple effects of the big hits and what it's done to some guys and their bodies. And the traumatic effects that they've had. Do you think we're going to see this when it comes to retired wrestlers?
From the previous generation, I don't think there's. You know what? I kind of noticed it with wrestlers that I know that were a little bit older as the years went on. I started seeing it already, and with the Vern Gagnes and people like that. Mm-hmm. And I think that I think that from that generation, I think that there's no doubt that we're going to see it. And I mean, even safe pro wrestling has its dangers because you're getting bonked around a lot. But I think that the guys from that 90s era where it was really out of control and one of the macho things was how hard of a chair shot you can take, I worry about those guys. You know, I mean, a lot of them are, 40-ish now. You know, I mean, they're not that old, but yeah, I worry about them when they get to be, 55, 60. Because I mean, if, you've seen the 60-minute stuff with the NFL players, and I think over the long haul, the NFL is going to be worse than the wrestling going forward, because in wrestling there are, you can protect yourself in wrestling, and you can make rules essentially in pro wrestling where, okay, you don't mess with somebody's head, and everyone kind of understands that. Whereas football, you don't have that latitude where you can, create a situation where you protect people, because it's like with MMA or boxing or kickboxing. It's so inherent in the game. When pro wrestling, you can do flips and things like that, and you don't have to take a chair shot to the head, and you don't have to, the punch to the face is pulled anyway, and you can protect the head. You can protect yourself a lot more in a worked environment, even though, the guys get hurt every bit as much as in any sport. But in football, what can you do? In boxing, what can you do?
Going back to the whole Chris Benoit situation, it's funny because, a lot of people talk about anniversaries. And when it comes to this, I think there's a lot of people that recognize it's been 5 years, but at the same time, they don't like talking about it because of just how gruesome actually it was. Do you see it where there's a lot of people that, when it comes to this entire situation, they're trying to just wipe it from their mind in a lot of ways and just say, yeah, I realize it happened, but I just don't want to talk about it?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's that. It's a weird thing because, I mean, in no other form of sports or entertainment has someone at the level of him been attempted to be completely whitewashed from history, not by the fans so much, but by the WWE, in the sense of, they've rewritten their history, that the main event at that one WrestleMania that Chris Benoit was in was actually not on the card, and whatever the semi-main event was actually the real main event.
Yeah, WrestleMania 20 when he did the triple threat.
Right. The call was it Kurt Angle and Eddie that was on that card?
Yeah, it was Kurt Angle and Eddie were the undercard, and the main event was Shawn Hunter and Benoit. Right,
so that match has been erased, and all references to Benoit are erased. And it's like, in football with O.J. Simpson, it's like, they don't erase O.J. Simpson's history. It's like, I don't think people will go out of their way to talk about him, but I don't think there's a rule in NFL films that you can't show O.J. Simpson on TV, but that, like, WWE does everything in their power. I mean, there might be a glimpse of Benoit in something where they can't edit him out, but as a general rule, his name is never to be mentioned. His matches are never to air. And I mean, they've really gone out of their way because it's just and I don't blame them. If it was me making the call, I would do the same thing to a degree as far as the showing of the matches. For sure, I would. As far as the elimination of mentioning him or rewriting the history that it didn't exist, I couldn't go that far. I believe too much that you have to record history as it was and not how you pretend it to be. But WWE definitely has a different attitude towards history than I do.
At the time, too, there was all this talk about congressional investigations and looking more into wrestling. And what was it, Congressman Henry Waxman was talking about that. And it really ended up going nowhere. Did you ever think that anything was going to come of that?
I always thought nothing would come of it because I just thought that at the end of the day, it's pro wrestling. It didn't matter. And there were a lot of deaths of pro wrestlers, more than, by percentage more than any other sport, far more than football, even though you're hearing a lot about the football players now. Still, on a percentage basis, nowhere close to the pro wrestlers. But it's pro wrestling. I mean, if the same thing happened in football, yes. If it happened in baseball, yes. But look at, I just remember, like, with the steroid investigations in baseball, how much heat the Congress got for wasting our time on that. And I'm just thinking, like, no matter what, even if it's a serious issue, you have these senators spending time on pro wrestling, you're just going to have a public going, like, we've got all these problems, which we certainly do have with the economy and other things, and you're wasting your time with these, fake pro wrestlers. I mean, this the thing that the pro wrestling had going for it that protected it, in a sense, from any scrutiny was the fakeness, even though the deaths were real. I mean, it's like, I know that, and wrestling fans don't seem to understand. They always think that wrestlers, that wrestling gets picked on. But I mean, if you look at the amount of publicity that the NFL has gotten, for concussions and some of the deaths of the NFL players like Dave Durson and stuff, and compare it to pro wrestlers, it's 20-1, or more. The wrestling is lucky it gets so little because the big media guys, they don't really want to touch it because it's like, it's number one, it's not their beat, and number two, they don't really understand it, and the other one is that they think it's beneath them and somehow to acknowledge it. So I just thought like Congress, they may do some quiet thing, and they did investigate it. And Dixie Carter and Vince McMahon were called in front of hearings, and they were kind of appalled. If you remember the Waxman report, it was pretty devastating. If you read it to the industry, it made the industry look terrible. But then it just disappeared from there. Nobody wanted to touch it from there. And I figured, then what are they going to do? Put people through congressional hearings? The public won't go for it, and they know it. And so, in that sense, wrestling's protected. But I think maybe that's an impetus of why Linda's running for Senate. I mean, I'm sure it's not the only reason, but then if she actually wins in the Senate, then they've got the clout that if something like this were to happen again, at least they got the clout in the Senate. And I think maybe they were, they looked at the situation and go, man, we got no friends. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's funny because it seems like anytime something really bad happens in wrestling, that, people always wonder like, oh, this is going to have a profound effect on the business. And quite honestly, it doesn't. And it just seems like the wrestling business is very Teflon from that standpoint, because I don't think enough people in mainstream care enough about it, understand enough about it, and just say, oh, that's pro wrestling. That there's a stigma on those guys. Stick them over in the corner, leave them on their own. Yeah, something dirty, something nasty happened over there or whatever, but that's what we expect from those guys, so it happened and we'll move on.
Well, the thing is that they're not respected as performers, which was too bad.
Right.
But, yeah, I mean, it's like when, it's a weird thing because like a TV character, when Ravishing Rick Rude dies, people think that it's like, a death, in a series, as opposed to a death of a person, who's got kids and has got a wife, and the kids are going to, like in these cases, and some of the cases of the families that and I know, I mean, it's absolutely horrible. These kids growing up without a father, I mean, and nobody ever thinks about that because again, it's wrestling. But even like even like with baseball and football, I mean, with all the stuff that's happened, like with football, the fact is football any less popular? It's not going to be.
Right.
It's like that stuff. They think, well, wrestling fans don't care. It's like, oh, I don't think wrestling fans are that much different than fans of other sports. You do the same thing. You could have the biggest star in auto racing, die in a crash, and that actually happened in our lifetime. And and people in that business, and there was a big furor and all that. But at the end of the day, is auto racing less popular today than it was then? It's actually probably more popular.
Yeah. A couple other things I wanted to talk with you about. So WWE announces they got the new TV deal coming up this fall on Ion. They're just they're not going to be happy until they have wrestling on 5 days a week, are they?
That's what Vince said a couple months, about a year ago. He said, like when they were, this is when they still had the Thursday Superstar show and the NXT on Tuesday.
Right.
And Vince said, we still need to get a show on Wednesday. And I'm thinking, like, God, please don't. But now that they've lost the Tuesday and the Thursday show, okay, so adding a Wednesday on Ion. I mean, it's going to be what it's going to be. I mean, I'm sure Ion's paying a good price for it. And if it delivers ratings, then Ion will be happy. I mean, WGN, canceled their show. Sci-Fi canceled the NXT show. And it was over ratings, and so I mean, it's, we'll see. I mean, Ion is a station as far as the compatible audience. It's probably about the farthest away from what you would expect for WWE, but at the same time, I'm sure that one of the reasons that they're getting WWE is they're trying to get a younger audience. So it's a strategy. I mean, I don't see with especially now with 3 hours of Raw starting in a month, and 2 hours of SmackDown, I don't see a lot of people being interested in watching another WWE show during the week. I mean, there'll be some hardcores. I mean, there's going to be whatever the number is, 500,000, 750,000, and if that's enough for Ion to pay what they're paying, then it'll stay. And if it's not, then it'll do its year, and it'll be gone like WGN America's wrestling show.
Yeah, that's what I've always questioned when it comes to companies like even WGN or now Ion. When it comes to these new TV deals, I understand you want to try to get a younger audience, but at the same time, do you realize what you're getting? You're not even getting a B-level show. You're just kind of getting this whatever we can scrap together kind of show for those things that really aren't going to draw that high of a ratings. But yet, for some reason, and tell me if I'm wrong, it's almost like they're looking at, Raw and to some SmackDown saying, oh, you know what? Well, if we can get a number, anywhere in that ballpark, or even if we get a half of that number, we're doing really good. But I just think there's just so much programming, and then what they actually put on a show like that, it's really tough to get an audience for it.
Yeah, but Ion's not knocked them dead. Although I check, Ion's primetime average is an 0.7,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know that, if I'm going to predict a number on this show, it probably would be right at an 0.7. So you're talking about an 0.7, with lower ad rates than what you're usually used to getting because wrestling delivers that. And I don't know what a bargain that really is, but time will tell. They'll give it the year, and it's a touch and go. I mean, it's not like there's all kinds of stations clamoring for WWE product. This is the first new station that WWE has signed on since WGN, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what is the latest on Ric Flair? You got a little altercation with his wife last night.
Yeah, I don't know much more about that. I've called the police and haven't heard back from them. Other than the report that's already been out. It's just that his wife assaulted him, and the police were called, and they filed a report, and nobody was arrested, and he didn't press charges, and probably nothing will happen from there other than it made press, and I'm sure that he wishes with his endorsements and everything that this stuff didn't, but it did, and it did in the Charlotte market. I know Rick is a funny one in the sense that I guess coming from the era that he came from, a story can be like all over the internet, nationally, worldwide. It doesn't concern him at all. But if it's like if it's in the Charlotte paper or on Charlotte radio, that's huge. And this did make Charlotte media, so I'm sure he's not happy.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't be happy. Now, it's a weird situation with him when it comes to wrestling right now because he's not under contract anywhere. TNA, I'm assuming, isn't going to want him back anytime after the way that he left there and everything that happened. But he can't go to WWE anytime soon because of the Wittenstein lawsuit, correct?
Not 100% official, but certainly don't you think, given that Rick's the name mentioned, that
they got to steer clear of him, I would think.
I think that they have to steer clear of him probably until the suit, and the suit might go on for a long time.
Yeah.
And also he's got a non-compete clause. When he got his release from TNA, one of the things was that they held him to a non-compete clause. So, he can't go. Obviously the lawsuit's going to go a hell of a lot longer than a non-compete. But, yeah, I think that as long as this suit is going, given that Ric Flair is the single name that is mentioned in the suit, I think that WWE pretty much has to not use Ric Flair. So, that could be for a long time. And, Rick's already 63.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think we're going to see him involved in a wrestling promotion until 2013, if not longer.
But okay, let's say 2013, the guy would be.
He turned 64
years old.
Yeah, at the end of February.
And Vince with the whole thing about the aging and everything like that. I could see certainly could Ric Flair show up, and I don't even think they would have him do a match because they're so intent on honoring that retirement thing that they also rewrite history. Like when Rick came back for the Hall of Fame, if you remember, all of their material said that Rick retired in 2008, even though he was wrestling not all the time, but he was still wrestling in TNA at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not going to let him wrestle. And I don't see them having him be a weekly TV character. Now, will he show up like a Mick Foley every now and then just to do a promo and people be happy Ric Flair's there on a special 3-hour show, 2-3 times a year? Absolutely. At some point that's going to happen, whether it's 2 years down the line or not. But as far as like being a weekly character on television, I think that when he left TNA, I think that's going to be it.
Yeah, and I think the best use of him right now is if and when they ever get the WWE network going, is to utilize him on that. Don't you agree?
Yes, and I think that's what was going to end up happening. But again, WWE Network, number one, when's it going to get going? And number two, if it gets going, how long is it going to last? There's so many questions. Maybe, again, I don't have this preconceived notion that this thing's going to be this catastrophic failure like everyone else, or I don't say everyone else, but like a lot of people have. But certainly you have to go in there very skeptical. Number one, for how long, they've been talking about it and they haven't delivered it, how few programs we've heard about it, and when you read the programs, they certainly don't sound very good for the most part, and and just the climate and everything. It's far from a hit, and I don't look at that network and go, oh yeah, that network's gonna be around for 30 years. It may, but it may also be something that I think it'll get off the ground because it has to. But as far as its longevity, you know, that's a crapshoot.
Yeah, and I know that you wrote the story in the newsletter talking about, you know, what the structure is going to be like for that. And there's been some talk about, could it be like an HBO or a Showtime? It's a pay for channel kind of thing. But I mean, if you do that, even if you use a round number of, say, it's $10, how many people really are you going to get, you know, to buy that thing? I mean, you might get as many as people that buy your pay-per-views on a regular basis, and
that's 100,000,
right?
Because we're only talking United States.
That's $1 million. I mean, that's nothing.
$1 million, and I'm sure they have to split it with the cable companies.
Yeah,
in some form.
I mean, to make it viable, to even if you use a round number like that, God, 20 million is what you'd have to get. At least,
I think that, you know, if you're not getting 50, 60 million in revenue from subscribers, then you're probably going to be losing a lot of money.
Absolutely.
So it's a risk. I mean, can they get $1 million? I mean, when I've talked to people in wrestling, I mean, and I say, you know, the $1 million, which is kind of the number that I sense is the break-even number. People just go to me and goes, "Are you crazy?" You know, they don't have a prayer of that. You know, and everyone's talking like the number's going to be 100,000, and I don't know, maybe it'll be a little bit more. But I mean, like, as far as, you know, we have the 24/7, you know, on demand, and that number started a certain level and has slowly gone down. And worldwide, I think that the number, you know, God, what was the number worldwide? It wasn't that big, though. I mean, at all. You know, it was, you know, I mean, it might be a little bit over 100,000, but that's worldwide. I mean, we're talking just United States market. I'm sure it's way under 100,000. And that's the audience that's going to be buying this network. Now it's going to be a lot more programming, and they're going to promote it harder and all that. But, you know, and again, I think it will start out to a degree strong, but I don't think it's going to maintain. I think, if anything, you know, it'll start out at a certain level and trickle down, as opposed to start at a certain level and trickle up.
Yeah.
And you know what that. So I think that we're going to know within 2 months. You know, or certainly the first quarterly report after that thing's on, if it's a subscription, because, you know, the subscription was not the model they wanted, but it looks like that's the model they're going to be forced on, because the cable companies are just not, you know, they're not gung ho on this idea, and if they're not gung ho on it and promoting it, then you got it. That's a bad way to start.
And that's why I always kind of thought, you know, maybe they would back off of putting it actually on TV or on satellite. It would be something more kind of like a Hulu, where you can control it a little bit more, and you're actually going into kind of the new age where everything is online and people can access it, you know, whether it's on their computer or on their iPad, you know, you can hook it up, you can get it on your TV, and maybe that would be the way to go.
Yeah, and the problem is that then you're getting an even smaller audience, though. So you're doing a lot of programming that essentially, yeah, there's going to be people watching, kind of like, I mean, they've got a YouTube channel, and a lot of people, you know, I mean, in a sense, it's a very popular YouTube channel. But the only money that they make on it is that $1 million a year that YouTube pays them. And, you know, maybe they can get Hulu to pay them some sort of a rights fee or something like that. But again, that's not going to be the $50 million a year that they're looking at breaking even on. You know, you'd have to scale back. And I mean, they are still hiring people. So, I mean, if I had heard like the stories that like they're not hiring anyone, you know, I would go, okay, you know, they're pretty much given up on this network idea. But they are still talking about a launch. I mean, there's certainly no date. You know, the November date's coming pretty soon, which was the last date we heard, and I don't know that they're going to make that deadline either.
Yeah, I don't think they are. I mean, they're hiring people, but slowly, very, very slowly right now. Two last things. You mentioned Raw going to 3 hours here in about a month. What kind of effect do you think that's going to have on the viewing and on that show overall?
Hard to say, because I don't want to say until we see the shows, you know, what a 3 hour show looks like all the time. I mean, people always talk about Nitro when it went to 3 hours and how it went down, and it did, but it went up. It went up for a long time, for I think it was like a year before then it collapsed. And it collapsed because of bad programming. I don't know if it was so much the 3 hours. I mean, 3 hours accentuated it. 3 bad hours is worse than 2 bad hours. I don't know that Raw, to me, Raw is like an average wrestling show these days. When I watch it and it's over, it's not like when we used to watch Nitro in those days. I go, God, this is horrible. They're killing the company. I never feel they're killing the company, but I also don't feel like it's this great show and they're, you know, when it's over, it's like we're on a roll. Wrestling is really hot. I feel like it's kind of in that in between. It's not a move I would make. They don't have the depth of the roster for 3 hours. I know that they're going to start with the Titus O'Neills and the people like that. Primo and Epico, and try to give those kind of guys more time and more credibility with the tag team titles and stuff, just because they need more guys over. But as far as they're going to make more money, I'm sure USA's paying them a lot more for it, and that's the key. I don't know what the figure is, but if it's more money and they're already out there, the costs are pretty much fixed. It's a good financial deal for them as long as they don't burn their audience out, because if they burn their audience out, it's short-term money and long-term pain. And if the product is bad, because we saw this with WCW, if the product is bad, the long-term pain is far more devastating than the short-term money. If the product is okay, that's which is probably what this is going to be. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that for 3 hours it's going to be hard to maintain that rating. But again, if it goes from 3-0 in their minds, there's kind of a psychological barrier. When they get below 3, they panic, and it may get them below 3, and they so it's it may lead to panic, and when they panic, they start doing really crazy booking. Who knows?
More Psycho Sid. That's what I say. I'm kidding. Last thing, and I'm going to ask you to use all your powers on this one. Please try to make sense of how TNA ended Impact on Thursday, talking about how it was Dixie and AJ helping an addict.
I can't make heads or tails.
Come on, I need somebody to explain it to me to make sense.
I mean, the one that's been bothering me is explain Frankie Kazarian.
I can't.
I mean, it's like first he was being blackmailed. We thought that maybe he was cheating on his wife and Daniels had something on him. Then it came out that it was actually AJ, and he was protecting AJ, and he didn't like to do it. Then he was so mad because he found out what AJ did. It's like, why is he so mad that AJ helped some woman in rehab? I mean, and if he didn't know and Daniels was lying to him, now wouldn't next week on TV, shouldn't Kazarian turn on Daniels?
Yeah, but that ain't gonna happen.
So yeah, no, it makes no sense. And
you know what though? It's TNA. I mean, their audience is their audience, and it's probably really not going to be affected.
No, I mean, let's face it, they've had a lot worse programming for years than they've had of late. So no, it's not gonna hurt them, but it's too bad because that storyline was the number one storyline. That and the Joe Park storyline were the two storylines that had a little bit of momentum. And the Joe Park one is necessarily at some point, and they're obviously dragging this out as long as they can, is going to end. When it's revealed that Joe Park and Abyss are the same guy. And this other one, it was going to end at some point too, but this ending was just so terrible, and people just start thinking do you really want to invest in a storyline where at the end it ends up making no sense?
Yeah.
It's too bad.
Yeah.
In that sense.
I totally agree with you there. So, hey, I've asked you this before. Let me ask again. When are you going to get on Twitter?
I mean, it's funny. I need to be, but you just have no idea. I have no time.
I know.
I mean, if I had time, I would. I should be. There's no reason not to. It's not some people go, oh my God, he's, whatever. It's like the website and the newsletter are full-time jobs. They just take forever, and then doing the audio and everything like that. So it's just a timing issue of getting it set up. I mean, it's going to happen, probably this year at some point. Just some time when there's no news for 3 days, that's going to happen. I'll sit down and go, okay, today I'm going to do it.
Why don't we get Charlie Sheen to be your social media ambassador?
I like that idea, though. I think that they're going to get a lot of publicity, especially leading up to the show on that. I mean, I sometimes I think that they overdo the Twitter thing, and certainly when you look at the ratings and everything, it doesn't seem to have paid off at all. And certainly when you look at the attendances and the pay-per-views, I'm going they're working so hard at this. This is the new revolution. How come the numbers are dropping? So but as far as they're going to get a lot of publicity out of Charlie Sheen. So I think that was I think that was a pretty smart move.
I agree, as long as he doesn't pass out drunk that night or something.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't think
he's going to be at their show, is he?
I think he's going to be at home tweeting.
Yeah, he's going to do it from home. So as long as he's not too embarrassing, and I'm sure he's not going to be tweeting anyway. He's going to have somebody with him, who makes sure he doesn't do something stupid because
it's Charlie Sheen. He does stupid stuff all the time. I mean, he got kicked out of an LA Kings hockey game in the finals because he walked out of the building to smoke, and they wouldn't let him back in because that's their policy. Once you leave the building, you can't come back in. And the guy got in a argument with the cops over it.
Yeah.
It's Charlie Sheen, so what do you expect? So he is Dave Meltzer, the Wrestling Observer. You can check it out online at WrestlingObserver.com. Always appreciate the time, Dave. Thanks again, man.
Okay, thanks, Brian.